yeah, Mr. Director.
Oh. There isn't light bouncing off this, is there? Would you like me to move?
Janet, can you switch the urn off?
What's the greeting now? No, it's not.
That's a lot these days.
So hello everybody.
Hello.
And hello again to quite a number. Thank you very much. It's a great honour to be invited back. Normally, one speaks and you just dodge the missiles on the way out. But to be invited back for a second time is a very great honour indeed. So thank you, and it's a pleasure. I'm going to split this presentation into two parts. I'm going to talk about some of the current political issues first, and then I shall welcome questions and comments. And then I want to spend perhaps 5 or 10 minutes talking about internal Liberal Party organisational things, where I'd like to share some ideas with you, and also perhaps get your view on setting up a further meeting to talk about things in 6 or so weeks' time. So the first part, the unemployment figures, which were announced this week. Appalling. I'd like to quote Dr. John Philpott, who's the Chief Economic Advisor at the Chartered Institute of Personnel and Development. Some of you may have heard of that. It's the world's premier HR and personnel institute, based in the UK, I'm pleased to say. About 120,000 members, 120 countries represented in, and around about 140,000 members worldwide. So it's a really prestigious organisation. And their chief economic advisor said this: "These labour market figures are truly horrific, with the economy shedding almost 15,000 jobs each week between June and August. The quarterly rise in unemployment is reminiscent of an economy in recession rather than any kind of recovery, and it confirms that the private sector just isn't creating enough jobs at present to offset public sector job cuts." And he concludes by saying, "With 5.6 unemployed people for every job vacancy, the labour market is now back to where it was in the depths of the recession in 2009, and the underlying problem is getting even worse, given that 1 in 3 unemployed people have now been out of work for over 1 year, and if we have many more months like this, we're likely to see the re-emergence of the kind of economy that scarred Britain in the 1980s and 1990s. So not my words, not a politician's words, the words of an independent chief economist of a world-renowned organisation. So I'm sorry to say that since I was here earlier in the year, things have got worse in our country. The unemployment figures that I've just been speaking about, 2.57 of our fellow citizens out of work. The highest number since 1994. Just a minute, that was another Tory government, wasn't it? I'm really sorry to say that there's worse to come. All of the indicators say more people are going to lose their jobs throughout this year and next. Very worrying for our future, there are nearly 1 million 16 to 25-year-olds who are unemployed, and many of them have never had a job at all. I'm outraged that we have so many children living in poverty. The last Labour government, to their credit, said that they were working towards eliminating child poverty in our country by 2020. And that was something everybody could sign up to. The forecast now is that 25% of children in this country, 1 in 4 children, by 2020 will be living in absolute poverty. And as everyone gets poorer, the measurement, the differentials come down. So actually, even more than that will be living in poverty in today's terms. We have the 6th largest economy on the planet. And we're prepared to put up with our children living in poverty. It's obscene. The unemployment position is bad for men, but it's worse for women. If we look at the cuts currently and to come in the public sector, to its credit, the public sector over recent years have been working hard to get a gender balance, to employ pretty much roughly equal numbers of men and women. But that of course means that with all the cuts in the public sector, proportionally more women are going to lose their jobs and are losing their jobs. And I'm afraid it gets even worse because Mr. Cameron, that was the chap's name, wasn't it? Mr. Cameron suggests that the private sector will take up the slack. But if you think about some of the more traditional jobs that women have done, and this is purely a neutral comment, this is not to be interpreted as a sexist comment in any way, more women have been in secretarial, personal assistant, administration, those sorts of jobs. And of course in the private sector, many of those jobs are disappearing altogether because of modern technology. If I'd been standing here 20 years ago, I would have laughed if somebody had said, Henry, in 2011, you won't have a secretary, you won't have a PA, you won't necessarily need them. You know, it's absolutely absurd, but I share a PA now with several other people because most of it is done via new technology. So it's really bad for women in the private sector. But don't worry, because we've got these wonderful world-renowned institutions called the banks. What a relief. What are they doing to help? Well, just this week, RBS and Lloyds, both just happen to have majority shareholding by us, they've announced that they're going to withdraw the cash point facilities for their basic current account holders. And what that means in English is that the poorest people in the country who have the basic accounts will be charged for getting their money out of anybody else's machines. Most of us probably have cash cards. Most of us are probably used to going now to any bank's cash machine and getting free withdrawals. But in especially suburban and rural areas where there might only be one cash machine from one company in the town or the village, these people are going to be charged for withdrawing their own money by the banks that we own. That's good Tory policy. Mr. Cameron, that's him still, at last week's Tory conference. Did you see in the news, it just leaked out, didn't it, overnight when his speech was released, that he was going to call on all of us to pay our credit card bills. Pay our credit card bills. Why don't we do it? You know, I'm okay. I can pay them off every month. I'm a millionaire. I can always borrow a couple of million from George Osborne if I'm a bit short that week. And little Clay Ebert we take him for a walk every day, so he's all right. They don't have a clue, do they? They absolutely do not have a clue about real life. It's fascinating that they bang on about this, there's only a plan A. I did a little bit of research and I found that the public debt as a percentage of national GDP is now actually less than when I was born in the early 50s under a Tory government. And not long, yeah, less, it's astonishing, isn't it? And that after a few years led to our dear old friend Super Mac saying you've never had it so good. But the percentage was higher then. So something doesn't quite fit, does it? We're currently spending an average of £1.4 billion a year in Afghanistan. That's over and above our normal defence budget. An additional 1.4 million. And that's good, isn't it? Because last week again, a lot of things seem to have happened in this last week or so. President of Afghanistan, Mr. Karzai, and the commander of the coalition forces, of which our men and women are part, said that it's not working. It simply isn't working. What we are seeking to achieve there isn't happening. Kabul's fairly safe, apart from the odd bomb that gets through, but most of the country is ungovernable. Now, probably the historians amongst you will know that that's true anyway.
Yeah.
There have been 283 UK service personnel deaths since we've been there, and many thousands of people who've been injured of our troops. At least 18,000 Afghans have been killed, and I simply don't know how many tens of thousands of Afghans have been injured, probably quite severely. So I'm going to suggest that instead of waiting for 2014, when the coalition has announced that it's going to pull out, and of course the Taliban are now able to sit back and say, great, we don't need to do a huge amount, we'll just wait till we go. So instead of waiting till 2014, not advocating pulling out tomorrow, that would be stupid, but I think a phased withdrawal over the next 6 months of our forces from Afghanistan would be reasonable and ethical and sensible and achievable. A pretty gloomy picture I'm painting. It's going to get worse. I don't think that we've got any measure of hope at all for anything good coming out of this appalling and blinkered government. I simply don't see it. And I think that many good Liberal Democrats, are amazingly uncomfortable. They're squirming around thinking, what are we doing propping up this nasty right-wing Tory government?
Yeah.
And I'll come back to that perhaps in the second half, because there is an opportunity for us here. But there isn't any hope from the Tory government. The Labour Party seems to me to be so weak and vacillating at the moment. I mean, one would hope in these really troublous times that the leader of the Labour Party would be out there waving the progressive flag and saying, this is an alternative, this is what we should be doing. But dear Mr. Miliband seems to be absent most of the time. He's spending his energies shoring up his own position, I think, within the Labour Party. So there's no real opposition, there's no structured opposition which allows this Tory government to get away with things. Paradoxically and ironically, yet again, the only real opposition is coming from the unelected House of Lords. The Conservative Party, the Liberal Democrats and the Labour Party are all jostling in the muddled middle, or the soporific centre, some people call it. But do you know, over the last 5 to 10 years, the centre ground has shifted to the right. I think there is now a tremendous vacuum on the progressive end of politics, the liberal end of politics. And I think this again is a magnificent opportunity for us as the Liberal Party to reoccupy the progressive, radical, liberal ground and provide some real hope for our fellow citizens. So what can the Liberal Party suggest? Well, I'm all in favour of new ideas and innovative thinking, and I'm going to share a few of my ideas with you now. I'm not going to pretend they are Liberal Party policy, but I think we need, all of us, to be talking about how can we do things differently, what should we be doing. I said earlier that it's very tough for women at the moment, and it's going to get worse. So, part of that problem is childcare. I think that we should immediately fund, I'll come to how we pay for it in a minute, we should immediately reinstate the Sure Start scheme. Many of them have been cut. It was a brilliant scheme. We need it back in full right now. I'd like to go beyond that because I think we should have a free national child creche scheme, and I think we should consider using things like schools and other public buildings because there's infrastructure there. But I want to have the private sector involved. I'm not a nationalise everything and I'm not a privatise everything. I am actually a good liberal mixed economist. So I think we want the private sector to be involved in running it, and I wouldn't want those people to be put out of job because there's a national creche scheme. So I think there's a chance to work together and create more jobs there as well as providing those facilities. I think that we need to look at the implications of the changes in retirement age rules, whereby people now can stay beyond the traditional retirement ages in their work. There's no longer the automatic cut-off if companies want to. And I think that one of the effects of that is that it's blocking off the few jobs which would have been available for young people to come in at the other end of the pipeline. And that's dangerous as well. Some people, of course, feel that they simply can't afford to retire. So we've got some pressure there at both ends. Now, how about this? I think that the government, and yes, he'll tell you how he's going to pay for it in a minute, I think the government should pay companies to employ young people in that 16 to 25 year group to buddy up with every person that that company employs who's over retirement age. So it's no cost to the company. We collectively pick up the tab, but what it means is that all of the excellent skills and knowledge and understanding that those older people have can be transferred to younger people, which is good for them, it's good for the company, and it's good for the country as well. I would initially do that for small and medium-sized enterprises, so up to 250 PAYE employees, but hey, we might look at extending it to larger firms as well. So that's something that will help at both ends. Pensions, of course, are shrinking, and with low interest and low dividends, it hits annuity as it hits retirement pensions. So, I think we should increase the state retirement pension by 2/3. And I'll pay for it with my £1.4 billion that I'm going to save by pulling out of Afghanistan in 6 months. In, out, zero, no additional cost, no extra taxes. Isn't it comforting to know that the Bank of England has issued £75 billion worth of quantitative easing? It sounds a bit like a sort of gigantic fiscal X-lax tablet, doesn't it? Although they're probably more useful. So, that's good, boys and girls, in the City of London, isn't it? £75 billion, supposedly. It just means printing money, by the way. It sounds lovely, but it's printing money. It's going to go straight into the coffers of the commercial banks to be offset against some of their dodgy deals and their internal funds. It's supposed to help to stimulate the economy, to let them give more favourable views to small businesses for loans. They're supposed to have done that with the last lot, aren't they? I was talking to a company a couple of weeks ago, who wanted to borrow £40,000, established business, £40,000, went to their bank, mustn't advertise, but it's called Barclays, and Barclays said, yeah, of course you can have £40,000, but we want 100% charge over your house, worth, I don't know, 253,000, 300,000. And the interest rate is 19.99%. And that's how Barclays, and I only mention them because it's a specific incident, the other ones are just as bad. This is how they are helping small businesses. Not a chance, is there? Not a chance. I said earlier that we own RBS. Well, we've got an 83% stakeholding in it. And we've got just over 2/3 in Lloyd's TSB. So, I want us, please bear in mind I'm not a old style socialist nationaliser, but in this instance and for a short period, I want us to fully own RBS and Lloyd's TSB. So I want us to buy, as a nation, the other shareholdings. And I want that 75 billion to be channelled into those two banks, with a mandate to those banks that they have to lend it out to small businesses and support the kind of schemes, like I was talking about earlier, the creche schemes, support those schemes for the good of the nation to get some growth going. I don't want to put the commercial banks out of business, because they do employ a lot of people, they do generate some wealth, and we will need them for the future. So I would even go as far as to say that loans from a revamped Royal Bank of Scotland and Lloyd's TSB should be perhaps 1 or 2% over standard base rate, but that would still take them nowhere near the 19.99% that I was talking about earlier. So we'd be challenging them to say, put up or shut up. And we need to do some significantly radical things in order to generate growth, to generate business, to generate jobs, to generate taxes, and to generate some hope for the future. Thank you. Before I go on to the organisational things that I'd like to share with you, I'd be very happy to take any questions or comments from anything arising from what I've said. Would anybody like to say anything?
Sir Henry, one thing I've always thought would put us in a unique position is this. When the country rejected any one main party and didn't give them a majority, and all the parties were saying we're in the worst crisis since the Second World War, what happened then was there was a national coalition. And I argued at the time, with obviously just very few local people, that if I were a Liberal leader, I would say this is the terms. We take the best minds from all the parties, form a national coalition, we give them a limited time period, they've got 2 years, say, to sort this out, and then we go to the country again. Because from that Second World War, the thing that the Liberals achieved was the National Health Service, and that came out of that coalition government, and that was quite radical for its time. Now, I believe that if we had an MP that was a Liberal, he could have put that forward. And if there's any way now we can take that argument forward again and say, look, stop squabbling party politics. If it's as serious as you've said, even as recently as a couple of months ago, that it is like a war situation, then I think that our Liberal Party should put that forward as a principled stand at this moment, get the best minds from all the parties, sit them round the table and get them to work to put this country right, and then they can go back to pursuing their centre-right, progressive, whatever. But I think that's a stand we as a Liberal Party should take. It's time now, if they're serious about putting the country right, for them to get together and stop squabbling.
I think that's a wonderful idea, and I think that should certainly be supported to the stage of how we're going to do it, and what lead are we in the Liberal Party going to give with such things as these ideas, and there's plenty more ideas around. I think there is a danger in suggesting it and then not saying what we want to do with it. So I think we would need to say, and this is what we suggest, but the underlying idea of getting some good brains together for a limited period, you're quite right there, is an excellent one, and thank you for sharing that with us. Any other?
Yeah, Henry, I'm treasurer of the local museum, and we've got a display in our museum of a local lad who got the VC.
Right.
I'll give you one guess where he won it in the 1880s.
Starts with A.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, exactly. Now I share your views on Afghanistan. I weep when I see all those bodies being brought. Well, it was through Royal Bassett until a week or two ago. What does worry me is what's going to happen to those who've actually worked and collaborated with us when the Taliban take over again.
It's the same as the people in Iraq, isn't it? The translators and the helpers, and we just left them. I think that we have a moral commitment to people who help us, to help them in whatever way is going to, first of all, protect their lives, but also their families and their well-being. So, I know some Afghan people who've come over as refugees, and they're amazingly hard-working people, astonishingly hard-working people, very, very highly intelligent, very motivated, and these are, in terms merely refugees, for people who've actually supported our forces, or perhaps even we should say more broadly the coalition forces in Afghanistan. I think that we need to be open border to them, because the sort of people who've been helping us are the sort of people who can help this country. So if that's the thrust of your question, then that's what I think should happen. Do you have a different view?
No, I don't have a view. I am just worried of what's going to happen to them. But too often in the past, we haven't supported those who helped us. And the way we have treated people, well, the Gurkhas is one example, and but also a hypocritical way we gave all the Ugandan nations British passports just to buy them off. And in the end, it did rebound on us, didn't it?
Yeah, I think pragmatism needs to go hand in hand with ethics. So thank you for that. Any other questions or comments before I move on?
Sir Henry, isn't one of the things that seems to be wrong with politics today is that so many of the politicians, they go to university, they then work for the party, and then they stand and then they're elected, and they don't know what the rest of life is about. But what could be done about it, I don't know. Unless you say you can't be a politician until you've had a work until you're 50 years old. Well,
There's a difficulty here, because I'm going to alienate you now. I'm going to say that our MPs are not paid enough. We expect them to legislate on world-shattering issues, and we pay them a fraction of what most chief executives of local authorities get paid. So you pay peanuts, you get monkeys. However, the broader point, I'd certainly support the thrust of what you're saying, that we have people who just go through university college, go into the lobbying system and then get elected. Well, I'm not going to say they're all stupid. Far from it. Some are really highly intelligent and very valuable. But one of the things that paradoxically has caused this is, do you remember a few years ago when in the Labour government said we're going to make the Commons more woman-friendly by changing the sitting hours? Now, quite laudable in what it's setting out to do, but one of the unforeseen side effects was that people who had business interests could no longer pursue them. Because when the Commons used to start at 2 o'clock, and this goes back to some of our lovely posters around here. This bloke was around in Gladstone's time as well, I think. Wasn't it? People, and it was men, of course, in those times, the men used to go to business in the morning and go to the house in the afternoon and drink port at the dispatch box throughout the night. So I think what we need to do is bite the bullet and say, what do we want our legislators to do? What are we going to require of them if we pay them properly, and how do they account for it? Rather unlike the Dickensian Dr. Fox and Mr. Werrity. But we absolutely need to get a mix of people in the House of Commons. But that then leads me on to, what about regional governments for England? And what about some real proportionality in our elections? So I think for me, it fits in a general electoral and governance reform package, but it is an important constituent part of it. Thank you for raising it. Any other questions or comments before I go on to it?
Just to comment on what you said there, you know, with regard to alienating us, I totally agree. We don't pay our politicians enough. That, I think, was what led to the expenses scandals. Because Thatcher said back in the 1980s, she said, no, you're not going to get a pay rise now, you can deal with all these things through the expenses. That's how we finished up with corrupt politicians. I mean, for goodness sake, when somebody's got a constituency in Luton and they're asking for dry rot to be cured in a house in Southampton, we know it spreads, but not 70 miles up the motorway. You know? and that was how we got it. And there wasn't a single party, I think, was free of that. You know, they all had their corruptions. I think Hume was the one that charged us £150 for a trouser press. In our house, that's called an ironing board, and I can get it for a lot less than £150. But I do agree with you there. But on the other point, yes, we've had MPs from all sides of the House that have been barristers in the morning and MPs in the afternoon. Perhaps it should be that once you're elected, you are a member of Parliament. Forget the other jobs, you don't have another job. That is your job. That's what I'm paying you to do. I don't want to see Ben Bradshaw, my MP in Exeter, being an MP in the morning and going back to his old job, being a journalist, you know, the rest of the day. But perhaps, you know, there should be some sort of legislation that says, if you're an MP, you're an MP, you're nothing else.
Sure.
Put the other side for, you know, your term of office.
Sure. But I want to attract as MPs high flyers and people who understand. So I think if we link both of those points, there's our answer.
But your background, the background you come from, is where you bring the experience from.
Yes.
Yeah.
My mother could have run the economy because she would have told people, you know, if you can't afford it, you can't have it. And what she did at the end of the week was she took all the money that my father brought home, put it in envelopes, and that was for the insurance man, that was for the milkman, and that's how you pay for it. We have this, again we go back to the 80s and we go back to Thatcher, when everybody was being pushed at that time, and I had it in my industry, and I'll bet everybody else here now who's in employment doesn't get paid cash at the end of the week. It goes straight into the bank. And once the banks got hold of your money, they were ringing you up and saying, you're now a valued customer. You know, you've just bought your councillors, you've got equity, you can have 10,000 in your bank account tomorrow. That's why we've got the problems we've got now. There's a direct line to that time, back in the 80s. And that's the situation. How we cure that, I don't know. I'll leave others to think about it.
Well, we start by getting you back on Exeter Council. That's how we start.
Isn't it?
Yeah.
Seriously, absolutely. Yes.
I agree with much of what you have said. Dare I disagree amongst these people. But one of the things that we've got to do, and I've picked up a lot of confusion in the last few months through the failure of the Liberal Democrats. There is a confusion amongst the young, middle-aged and elderly between the Liberal Party and the other party.
Yeah.
And we've got to, we've got to have a national campaign and local campaigns to, in fact, educate the proletariat, if that's the right word.
Do you know, you are such a wonderful man, because if I had wanted to plant a link to my second bit, I could have done it. That's absolutely perfect. So thank you. It leads exactly into, oh my goodness, exactly into the last 5, maybe 7 minutes that I promised at the top of this, that I'd talk about some internal party things. Now, this poster says here, working together to revive, refresh and renew liberalism in Devon. and these are beginning to roll out around the country. So rather than Devon, it might have London or it might have Manchester or something. But this is what we are trying to do, all of us trying to do, because fundamentally we have to find some means of telling the people out there that we exist and who we are, as well as who we're not, but who we are as well. And we need to pool our resources in many senses. You know, gone are the days when the constituencies and the branches all had hundreds of people working and doing all sorts. It doesn't happen like that anymore. And we are an ageing political clan, all parties, not just our party. So I think it makes sense to work smarter, not harder. I think that I'll reprise what I said last time I was here. I want to encourage you all to be as lazy as possible and do as little as possible. But that means finding out what we're good at, what we enjoy doing, and put all of that together, and we actually achieve perhaps more than we have done in the past. So working together and pooling resources, we've got Tiverton and Honiton and Exeter here, we've got Wiltshire here, we've got Somerset here, and I think you delightfully mentioned the old Wessex, or the Western Counties, sorry. And I can't remember the name of that lovely lady who used to be Secretary of Western. Anyway, by the way. In Waltham Forest, where I'm based, the Waltham Forest, which is a local council, a London borough, covers effectively 3 different constituencies. So when we were setting up the Liberal Party there earlier this year, or re-establishing it perhaps I should say, we took a decision to go for a borough party rather than constituencies because we have limited resources in terms of people and money and other things. And it makes good sense to bring together, to pool the resource, to grow, and then great, you know, once we're big up and running and national again, fine, we can have devolved powers back, good old Liberal tradition. But I think also that we need to look very, very carefully at new ways of working. I was chatting to Joan and David and George over... Chris, I'm sorry, Chris. Chris.
The second name is George.
Oh, that's wonderful. I'm always looking ahead. So, what I was saying was that for people perhaps up to the age of 30, maybe 35, leaflets through the doors are completely old hat. It's new media, it's the internet, it's Facebook, it's Twitter. Now some of these terms may not mean much to some of us, but they mean an awful lot to younger people who tend to be disengaged from politics anyway. So if we're going to attract younger people, we've got to have something livelier and sexier and jazzier to attract them. And the medium is the message. You remember that old phrase? It's still absolutely true. But of course, what we're going to talk about has to change as well. And I think rather than the party initiating campaigns, nothing against that, but I'm saying that alongside us initiating things, we ought to get together with local interest groups, with local opinion formers, people who are active in the community. It might be on a single issue, it doesn't matter, but they're people who other people listen to. So we can trickle down our message through them. If we have a website, and I'm going to urge you to consider having a local, or maybe a Devon, don't know, website at some stage, this is the way we can get our messages out. In Waltham Forest we've just started a series of Vox Pops that Dave here and co are videoing for us, so that people locally can then click on our website, what's on locally, oh, you know, those shops are closing because the local council's put the rent up too much. Things which will resonate with local people. And of course with modern technology, it's relatively easy to do these sorts of things, to get our message out. I'm not saying we abandon leaflets altogether, but maybe fewer of those, and maybe on every one a big banner saying check our website, because you all know how long it takes to write leaflets and produce them and pay for them and deliver them. Well, if you can do the same thing, get the same message out to more people at the click of a button at no cost, then I'm all in favour of trying that as well. So, new media, new messages. Again, internally, we're just at the penultimate stage of releasing the Liberal election agents, something or other, data entry recording system. Leaders. It's similar to EARS, for those who knew the Liberal Democrat system. It's the electronic way of recording how people are going to vote following canvassing. And there's